and welcome to Find It on this Wednesday evening. And what is today? It's Hump Day. And who's my guest? It's Scott Humphreys. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of cute. But today he is going to talk to us about his life and living and dealing with mental illness, basically. And there's so much stigma around it. We're going to dive into it, clear some things up, get an education. I'm in my shirt, Mental Health Matters, ready to roll. So stay tuned, and we're going to show an intro for Scott, and then he will be right back with us. Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Debbie. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm really, really pumped to have you on because I've had the opportunity to get to know you and get to speak with you. And you have a lot of valuable information that really needs to be out there to help other people. And so I guess what I just want to start with is just kind of dive right into your life and whatever you're comfortable with sharing, Scott, we would
Yes.
love to hear. So like where, you were where were you born? Where are you living now? And how was your childhood, Scott?
So, yeah, and I think it's fair to say, maybe I'll start with my diagnosis, which is borderline personality disorder. So where I grew up was Hyde Park, New York. And a little later on in my early teens, I moved to Poughkeepsie, New York. So that's about 2 hours north of New York City here in New York State. I currently live in a little town just north of those two called Rhinebeck, New York. Quaint little town formed in the late 1600s. Very old, very nice, very beautiful place in the Hudson Valley. My childhood was a very interesting one. A lot of people with borderline personality disorder have childhood trauma. In fact, 70% of us indicate that they have had childhood trauma. Now, it's really important, I want to say here at the start of the show, that I'm speaking for myself and my experience with borderline personality disorder. While there are a lot of common traits that exist amongst a lot of people who have this disorder, it does manifest itself in many different ways. There are 9 different traits according to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. And you have to have, I believe, 5 out of the 9 consistently in order to have a diagnosis. So there's varying severities of each one of those traits, and you can have different matches of them.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, a lot of us do have childhood trauma. Some of us do not. Some of us have extreme emotional sensitivity. And what happens is, and the way it's described by the psychiatric community, is when you have extreme sensitivity, emotional sensitivity, and you grow up in what's called an invalidating environment. Let's say, you grow up in a home where emotional expression was shut down, right? Anytime you had emotions, you were told to go to your room, be quiet, whatever that is. That's sort of a broad way of explaining what an invalidating environment is. Those situations, when you have extreme emotional sensitivity and you grow up in an environment that stifles your emotional expression, that too has been shown to manifest this disorder. But so for my case, I had childhood trauma. I grew up in a very chaotic household. My father was an alcoholic, and looking back, knowing what I know now, he displayed traits of a few mental illnesses, but he definitely displayed traits of borderline personality disorder, a little bit of narcissistic personality disorder. And I did the back of the napkin math one time in therapy, and I figured out that I probably experienced somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 different episodes of chaos, emotional chaos, growing up in my life. If you figure in 5 days a week, over the course of in and out of my family dynamic over 30 years, which is a lot. That is a lot. And especially when you experience trauma in your developmental years, your nervous system gets conditioned to those responses, right? So the emotional instability that occurs with borderline personality disorder, it might be good to describe some of the traits.
Yes, because some people think this is like multiple personalities. That's not at all.
No.
Because I mean, there's so many people that have the wrong idea of all the different types of mental health illnesses. So this is what's amazing to me. Yes, tell us what it is exactly that, well, I mean, not exactly because it's not down to a science, right? But tell us what those traits are for B.
Yeah. It's not multiple personality disorder. No. And that's now referred to as DID, dissociative identity disorder. But borderline actually does get often misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder because of the intense emotional mood swings.
Okay.
So the 9 traits as listed in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual are fear of abandonment is the first one. And I think that is something that I can safely say is pretty common for most people who have the disorder. So that's fear of abandonment, whether it's real or perceived. And in many cases, we have a perceived fear of abandonment based on just also having a low sense of self-worth. So we're constantly afraid that people in our lives that we love and care about are going to reject us and leave us because of our intense emotions. So fear of abandonment is one of the primary ones. Intense interpersonal relationships, very intense connections, especially in romantic relationships, but also friendships as well.
What do you mean intense?
So very intense emotional connection and very quick emotional connection. Like all of these things sort of tie together, and I'll get to the other ones, but the lack of self-worth, which is a part of these traits too, and chronic feelings of emptiness, leave us really love-starved. And for me personally, I'll speak to my own situation. Like growing up in the home that I did, my mother was a wonderful human being and really an angel, and gave me a lot of love. And it's really the only reason I think that I have such a strong baseline of love and compassion and empathy. And I was able to build that up within myself very successfully after treatment. But my father, and living with him and his abusive nature, it makes the expression of love very difficult, the connection within the family. Even though my mother and I had a great relationship and she was such a wonderfully loving person, it's hard to make those connections and foster that real loving, nurturing connection when the threat is always there coming in to disrupt that.
Well,
if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah.
So in that case, we're love starved, and we connect very intensely with people who show us affection. Like it's not like, a lot of us can walk around and have, on the surface seem very much like everybody else. It's under stress, emotional stress, having triggers and things like that expose the underlying symptoms. So, a lot of us do get in relationships, like quite often. And I would argue that we are very wonderful people. But we seek out these relationships very intensely because of that lack of love that we've had.
For it.
Yeah, and we're usually love starved. And I only want to speak for myself, but I know because I have friends who have BPD that this is a common occurrence. And for me personally, my lack of self-worth was a big part of that. Another trait that goes along with this, as I said, is chronic feelings of emptiness. The lack of self-worth is sort of a really diplomatic way of saying we have a real severe case of self-loathing and just really feeling empty. There's a real disconnect between how we view ourselves and how the outside world might view us. It's another trait, I'll just continue on here, is an unstable sense of self, unstable self-image. And that comes along with the intense emotional mood swings, which is another trait. very intense emotional mood swings, and rapid cycling through multiple emotional states. So like that's why it gets confused with bipolar disorder, because bipolar, it's like you're up and then you're down, and that's the cycle. So with borderline personality disorder, you're also cycling through, but you're cycling through every emotional state, and you're doing so much more rapidly than you do with bipolar. Bipolar disorder, the episodes are a little bit more drawn out, or sometimes a lot more drawn out. Like they can last for weeks, sometimes for months. With borderline, you can cycle through multiple emotional states in a matter of hours. You know, you can be elated and then all of a sudden become incredibly sad and then spiral into depression, shame, and guilt, all within the course of a day. Um,
Wow.
and
Wow.
so that's the reason why it sometimes gets misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder. And having that emotional roller coaster as a part of your daily life, it and there are studies that correlate this. It causes a lack of self-worth. It diminishes your ability to really truly love yourself. Having intense emotions is correlated to a negative self-affect, and you know, that's true, I think, for other people too. You don't just have to have borderline to have that be something that's true for you.
Mm.
People with other mood disorders also report having a low self-esteem, low self-worth, chronic feelings of emptiness. There are a lot of things that people with borderline experience that actually, I think, can be quite common with people who struggle with mental health. Even if you don't have a diagnosis, I think a lot of us in today's society do struggle in some sense with a lot of things, like fear of abandonment. How many humans do you know that are afraid to be alone, right? Or have a fear of losing people that they love, right? It just so happens that with borderline, it's very intense. It's much more extreme. But so just to continue on here, the negative sense of self and the lack of self-worth is what leads us to attach to these intense relationships. And they oftentimes are very unstable because, and I found this with myself, when you're looking for a relationship, when you're looking for love, when you're looking for connection from a place where you have a void and you're looking to fill that void, that's a really, I think it's fair to say that's an unhealthy approach to love.
Yeah.
And you really need to love yourself and know yourself well in order to have a true connection with someone else. And
I 100% agree. And I sort of like, that's kind of my mantra. And what I work with people on and this show is about finding love inside of yourself so that you can have love to give and fully love people in the right way. But how then, Scott, does one that suffers with depression or BPD or any other type of mental illness find love inside? I mean, is that like when I'm like always saying you have to love yourself, and do
yes,
people with mental health issues want to throat punch me? Like, is it even? It's got to be a
well,
different road to figuring out how to love yourself if you have a mental illness, is what I'm saying.
it's a bigger lift, I think. And honestly, it's on the individual level, depending on what you're dealing with. With borderline, since it is one of the core traits that define the disorder, and if you do have the disorder, it's a huge, enormous undertaking. And for me, it included a lot of different things. So just to talk about healing really quickly, well, not really quickly, but so for me, healing involved working with a behavioral psychologist and working with a therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy. This is a therapy that deals with acceptance of symptoms, awareness, building awareness of symptoms and behaviors, and then also building skills to change the behavior by changing neural pathways, building new thought processes that then build new behaviors. And it's so far studies show that it's one of the most effective treatments for borderline personality disorder. The therapy itself was developed by Dr. Marsha Linehan, who herself has borderline personality disorder. So it's really important to note that the most effective therapy to treat this disorder was developed by someone who had it. She has a great book, Building a Life Worth Living. And it's her story of being a suicidal teenager. I'm sorry, I don't want to trigger anybody with that word.
Well, I know what you mean, but I mean, you got to say we're getting an education here. So
it's an important thing and it's one thing that we're not allowed to talk about on TikTok. And it's disappointing because it is such a big component of this.
Okay.
Self-harm is another core trait of this. Self-harm, suicidal behavior is overwhelming. And sometimes people can describe it as being attention-seeking, manipulative, and things like that, as if it isn't real for us. I can assure you that it's absolutely real. Someone can have a hard time understanding, well, how can you have suicidal ideation that many times or that often? Because for some of us, it's daily for years. And we have the highest rate of attempts that I think of any other mental illness there is. And it's one of the hardest things to get through and to overcome it. So going back to the healing process, how do you learn to love yourself? Loving yourself, learning how to love yourself, build up your sense of self-worth, for me was the key to treatment. Now, yes, dialectical behavioral therapy worked. It helped me build new thought processes around dealing with interpersonal relationships that were challenging. Maybe there's it helps you to deal with conflict in interpersonal relationships, whether that's a romantic, friendship, or professional. It helps you deal with emotional distress, and it helps you regulate emotion. So it helps you build skills around these things, as well as accepting and understanding what you currently deal with. It's a really comprehensive approach. It's a lot of homework. You're in a group session for a year, once a week, and then you do one individual session with your therapist in addition to that. So for an entire year, I did 4 sessions a month in group, and I did 1 additional with my psychologist. It was the most impactful year that I had in my entire life up until that point. There's been more since then.
Yeah.
But that therapy was a game changer for me. All of the windows opened up and the sunshine started coming in. And for the first time, I could really start to build awareness around what actually was going on in my mind and how it affected my behavior. The thing about personality disorders is the lack of awareness is one of the core traits as well. And it sounds hard to believe, how could a person who behaves in these ways with all of these extreme symptoms not be aware of what's going on? It just so happens that is absolutely the case. You are unaware of what your mind is doing and how it's driving your behavior. Once you start building awareness, everything changes. And so you're doing a lot of homework in the therapy sessions every week. You review the lesson on a particular skill that you're going to learn. Like maybe it's a chain link analysis on an unwanted behavior. So you analyze the first trigger. Actually, you go back before the trigger. You go to your vulnerability. Did you eat that day? What was your stress level like from other events in your life? Did anything happen? You look at your vulnerabilities, then you look at the trigger event that caused the unwanted behavior. Then you look at every step along the pathway of your behavior and identify where you could have made a choice to de-escalate. And so you write it all down. You do an impact statement. Essentially, you do an impact statement on your own behavior. And what that does is that it just strengthens and solidifies this new thought process that you're trying to building new neural pathways, new ways of thinking.
That's fascinating. When you were talking about the doctor that wrote the book and she has BPD and finding that creating new neural pathways. And so by listening to you, I feel like in order to create those new neural pathways, it's a process of every single day creating new thought processes, right?
Yes.
In order to almost like all the dead end stuff that you ruminate about.
Yes.
You take another path away from that. So eventually you don't keep hitting that roadblock is the way I visualized it when you were talking. Is that sort of kind of the same?
Yeah, it has to be a daily practice. It absolutely does. You have to practice it every day and do the homework during the week. So because your symptoms are going to happen while you're in the program, right? That's the point of being there. And so the homework is done during the week because you're now aware and you're now actively observing. So you have to do the work, and you can have something to write down and on the lesson every single night. That was my experience. There's always and once the observations start coming in, you start to apply. Well, the first thing is you go back to the group the next week, and then you read out everything that you worked on, and then everybody shares, and you really start to see everybody else's experience. You start to see the commonalities and the differences, and you start to note how everybody responds in their own individual ways. It just it's a great reinforcer to do it that way. But when you said about rumination, that is something that is very severe for us too. Chronic rumination.
Mhm.
When you have a mood disorder, or it's a cluster B disorder technically, but really I describe it as a mood disorder because of the emotional intensity. When you have something like this that's born from childhood development and childhood trauma, as it was in my case, your body and your fear response, your nervous system's response is conditioned. And what happens is your body actually becomes addicted to these responses, which is where this rumination comes from. Your mind also, your mind and your nervous system are addicted. Your mind is these neural pathways that have been conditioned by trauma. Those are there, and you're conditioned to think like that until you start to do this work. It is a big lift, as I said, to change it, but that's why the work is so intensive, and you're in weekly sessions with a group. And within 3 months, I started to notice a change. And that was with, being able to recognize when thought processes were starting to happen, being able to use my skills that I was learning to then, okay, nope, we understand what's going on here. Now know that this is the better choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a discipline. It's a lifestyle change. Nothing happens overnight. But by month 3, I started to notice the difference. By month 6, things really started to change. By the end of the year, I felt like a different person.
Wow.
I felt like a person who actually, I don't like to use the word control, but I guess there's not a better word right now. I had actually control over my thoughts and my emotions. And the other key to this is mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is something that a lot of people talk about. Mindfulness is essentially building awareness, being present, being fully present. Because when you talk about chronic rumination, that brings you into a state of dissociation. You're not dealing with your present moment.
Yes.
You're in your head on the hamster wheel, spinning around and around and around and around and around, and you're not here. We're fully engaged right now. If I was ruminating, I'd be pulled back into the dissociative part of my mind and dealing with this thing that my mind just wants me to run in circles on. So mindfulness is about becoming aware of those things, allowing them and accepting them to happen, and remaining fully present in the moment right now, and just surrendering to them and not being in conflict with them. It's interesting how the quickest way to start to eliminate and alleviate those ruminating, negative, intrusive thoughts is to accept them, to allow them to come in and then to go out, because they do. Thoughts are like waves. They come in, they go out. And when you're chronically used to ruminating, you're going to latch onto each wave and try to ride it out. Each one, you're going to want to stay on it and deal with it. And then that gets you hooked into the hamster wheel. Long story short, mindfulness was a really core part of retraining the neural pathways, because you don't get stuck on the hamster wheel anymore with mindfulness. You train yourself to be accepting, to surrender, to allow the thoughts to happen, and then to reframe your thoughts, to redirect your energy, to build those neural pathways. And the more you do it, it's a discipline, it's a lifestyle change. Like anything else, the stronger it gets. It's like running a marathon. The analogy that I use a lot is, if you were going to start training for a marathon and you've been a smoker and you just quit smoking, you got to start walking the first mile. You're not running the first mile. You're walking that first mile.
Right.
You may have to walk that first mile for a couple of weeks before you get up the strength to start running that first mile. Then you run the second mile. Then you're up to 5 miles. Then you're up to 10 miles. And then you're on your way. And that's the way, that's such a great analogy for what this is. So I hope that explains sort of what therapy is.
Really, really well. And there's a couple of things I want to say. One is that you made a really good point earlier that the doctor that wrote the book about neuropathways had BPD herself, right? Who better to explain and to help people than someone who actually is a brilliant person but has BPD?
Yes.
And the same with you. So when I asked you to be on, I know that you're not a psychiatrist or a psychologist,
No.
right? But I had listened to you so often, and everything that you were saying, you're very well spoken. You're very, of course you're educated. I got to say this, his first degree is in theater.
Theater. Yes. I was a stage actor for a little while.
Theater, I know, but I'm trying to be fancy.
Yes.
Which I love, and I can tell that you have good stage presence on here. But so I said to Scott, everyone listening, I said, I know that you don't have, you don't have your PhD and all of this, but you've lived it. You have helped yourself. You are a wealth of knowledge. And I feel like I want to learn from someone who's walked it, So how did you, well, let me ask, Terry McCluskey just popped up a question. So here we
Yes.
are. What are some key behaviors of someone with these disorders that family, friends, or coworkers can we recognize with people in our daily circle? What things could we do to help someone we know?
That's an interesting question, because a lot of the key behaviors you may not see in a circle of friends, and especially not in a professional environment. So, like most people with mental illness, we become very good at masking. We become very good at putting on everything's good. I'm good. And we all, not just people with mental illness, we all do that when we're having trouble. We don't want to, we feel like a burden. Some of the behaviors that you'll see is extreme emotional sensitivity, though. Someone with borderline, and I'll use myself, it can be extremely emotionally sensitive and can sometimes react in ways that are off the mark, that don't seem to match up with the thing that happened. It's like in a moment where there might be a slight conflict, maybe someone with BPD, like fear of rejection and abandonment. The fear of abandonment, it also includes rejection. So that can include criticism. And that criticism can be taken in a very harsh way and internalized, because we also have lack of self-worth. So we take that stuff really harshly. One of the things that I talk about, and I actually did a couple of videos on TikTok about this, was validation. And I think this is good for all human beings. Like the more we can validate each other, I think just in general in society, I think the better we will start to relate to each other overall. And validation is very important for people with BPD, because we feel so invalidated as it is. It's a chronic part of our illness, feeling invalidated. We have a hard time validating our own emotions, our own thoughts. And when someone criticizes us, or, we can take it very harshly. And so it's important to know that you don't have to cater to someone. If someone's reacting inappropriately, of course you want to call that out, but you also want to do it in a way that's like, hey, I understand that you're feeling this way, and I'm sorry that you're feeling this way, but I just I want you to know that I'm validating your emotions, but I understand that you're having this reaction and it's real for you, but I just want you to know that I didn't have that intention. It's like, I think overall humans in our society today could probably use a little bit more of that. Like, hey, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to offend you. This is just my opinion. But validation goes a really long way with us. And also for anyone with borderline personality disorder, we really critically need to develop the skill of validating our own emotions and thoughts. We need to be able to validate ourselves. It's a really important part of it. But if you wanted to help someone with BPD, it's just when you see someone having a tough emotional reaction, don't judge them for it. If it becomes problematic and abusive to you, and this is with any case, not just people with borderline, of course, set healthy boundaries for yourself. But if it's just something where you see someone having a problematic reaction to something, do your best to try to validate them. I think in general, we don't want to hurt other people. We don't want to see other people have bad reactions to things that we didn't intend to hurt them. And I think validating someone's experience, if they're reacting in a way that maybe you didn't, you're like, well, I didn't, it's like, they'll be like, that's wrong. Like, why are you having that experience? Why are you having that reaction?
Yeah.
Like that can be perceived as judgmental. So I think the more we can be non-judgmental with each other and the more we can validate each other's emotional experiences, I think that just strengthens relationships, whether or not you have a mental illness or BPD or not.
Well, that's really true, because sometimes when we think someone's having an unrealistic reaction to something, that why are you overreacting? Or my gosh, well, if you come at someone like that, then they're going to go into defense mode, and that's just confrontation. It's
Yes.
not helping the matter at all. So like you said, with or without mental illness, that's just, I think, a common courtesy to, if someone's overreacting to something, for you to overreact to them overreacting makes it worse. I mean, come on.
Absolutely.
But Scott, I'm, the show's called Find It, right? And you definitely found it with the right therapy. That changed your life. What prior to finding the right therapy happened for you on your life path? I mean, and how long have you felt really, like, I don't want to say control, like you said, control's not good, but you're more in control of your reality and your illness than ever before?
Yes. And there's before the therapy things that were really, fortuitous in my life. And then there are things since the therapy, including more of a spiritual awakening.
Nice.
So a couple of key things happened to me in my life early on. When I studied theater, studying acting was one of the greatest gifts that I had in my life. As I said, one of the traits of borderline personality disorder is an unstable sense of self. So what did I want to do? I wanted to go become an actor and figure out how to become other people. Through that, the acting training that I received was such a deep dive into yourself. And it's the journey of self-discovery that brings a character to life. Of course, the words on the page, the given circumstances of the play, are crucially important and tell the story. Mm-hmm. But understanding through that deep journey of, what is this character going through at this moment? What are their motivations? What's their objective in this scene? What are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to get from the other actors or characters in the play? All of those things get to the core of the desires of the character, which in turn you relate to your own core desires and needs.
Crazy the way that works.
And so I just so happened to have a wonderful mentor when I studied theater, and we were challenged in really, really deep ways to make those authentic discoveries. We weren't taught to go up there and show. We were taught, and nothing against that. I love musical theater and all that stuff.
Jazz hands.
Yes, jazz hands. I worked behind the scenes on musicals. I was never a good singer or dancer, but we were trained to look really deep into the emotional core of ourselves to help inform our performances for the characters that we played. And that was, it was one of the most impactful things. It helped me really find myself, and at an age when I really needed to. It's not that I didn't have an identity and didn't know who I was. That's not what it was. The unstable sense of self that I experienced was tied to my emotional dysregulation. My emotions are on this roller coaster. My ability to access my full self-worth shifted. How I looked at myself shifted based on my emotions, and those were always in flux. So that's how I relate to the shifting sense of self. That said, I also really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I was really disconnected from like a sense of purpose. And acting was the first time where I thought, this is absolutely where I need to be right now. Now, of course, like most actors, I did it for a while and then I didn't get a career out of it. I did get to have some amazing experience. I got to tour 45 states in a play based on The Outsiders. I don't know if you know the book, The Outsiders, by S.E. Hinton, and the movie with Tom Cruise, Rob Lowe, Patrick Swayze and all those guys. So I got to play Matt Dillon's character, Dally, the one that dies at the end.
Oh, darn.
But anyway, so I had an amazing experience. I got to see, 45 states in the country, and man, I did it on the road, which what a better way to see the United States.
Yeah.
So that's one thing before that really changed my life, really got me to tap into the thing that I think we all need, to find a true sense of self, to find something that gives us purpose, and to
That's the truth.
really take deep dives. Here's the thing about people with borderline personality disorder and why I think we're such amazing human beings. Because of the nature of the lack of self-worth and the suicidal ideation, excuse me, we are forced on a consistent basis to evaluate ourselves on the deepest levels. Because you're fighting for yourself every day through emotional chaos. And when you do that over and over and over again, the strength of character that develops underneath that is incredible. The depths of empathy and the ability to experience emotions, once we get a handle on it, is a superpower for us. Empathy, the ability to understand people's emotions, including our own, once we get a handle on it after treatment, is a superpower for us. I don't like to use the word.
Scott, the fact of the matter is, though, too, when you have a lot of empathy for someone, and then you are if during the illness, someone else's sadness could really overcome you, right? But
Yes.
once you get healthier and understand your BPD,
Yes,
then that's when it becomes something proactive in your life, where you can relate and understand and feel it and give advice and give love, but then also let it set and not internalize it.
that is the key. And having a good understanding of how to process emotional energy, and that comes with training, that comes with the work that we do in therapy. And you have to have that, because otherwise we are sponges for emotional energy. A lot of people who've experienced abuse, who may not be borderline but have mental health challenges, a lot of us talk about being able to sense the energy in a room, being able to sense where the negative energy is, because we're so used to, especially us with childhood trauma, we're used to having to be focused on the threat.
Who in this room is going to bring me down?
And oh wow, whoops, sorry.
We're back on stage.
Yeah, sorry. And so for us, we become hyper attuned to that, and we can absorb it. And energetically, I think I have a big energy field. I am a sponge for it. And until I learned how to manage that and actually even understood what it was,
right,
I would find my energy, my mood being affected incredibly by things that were happening with other people. Once you do get a handle on it, once you know how to manage that, once you know how to regulate your own emotional states, then it becomes a gift to be able to connect with people in that way. It really does.
I believe that. I think you're right on with that. Now, I have, what about the people now? So BPD people can have this without having trauma in their childhood too, right? Yeah. But you're just giving us your experiences and what you know based on what you've lived.
Yes.
I really want you to share, like, there may be people who are watching this or in the future will watch this. And if you're to give someone advice, like, I know there's so much stigma around mental health issues, but I think all of us have it to a degree, right? I mean, we're not perfect humans and we're going through this life trying to figure it all out. But I feel like there shouldn't be a stigma to it. It's something that we have to work on, just like any other illness. I mean, we've talked about before, like, if you're diabetic, you're going to take your medicine, I mean,
I am also.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. But, so if there are people out there watching who know that they're struggling with certain things, and they may not have BPD, but they may just have depression or bipolar issues or whatever the case may be, but maybe they're not ready to seek that help yet because they're either scared or they don't want it to. What can they do on their own right now to help them get a little bit better to maybe where they will then seek behavior psychologists or therapist or group sessions or whatever?
That is a really challenging question to answer.
I'm sorry.
And I would, and I know what it's like because I resisted early
Mhm.
on. And it just so happens that I think part of the generation that I grew up in, Generation X, I mean, I'm 46 years old. I'm going to be 47 on New Year's Eve. We are the generation that nobody cared about. Go play in the woods. Here's a can of gasoline and a stick of matches. Go for it, kid.
That's awesome.
And
No shoes, no seatbelt.
yeah. And so we grew up being resilient. And I know we're not the only generation. Don't get me wrong. There are pretty much every generation before us too kind of had to get out there and go do it yourself. And so, but with that comes a sense of like, oh, I have to get through this alone. No one's going to be there for me. And also when you have challenges in mental health, you can often feel like a burden to other people. What I want to say is you're not. And I also want to say you're not alone. There are communities online on every platform with people just like you. Doesn't matter what your particular thing is that you're struggling with right now. There's a community of people out there. Guaranteed. I can say that with 100% surety. There is a group of people talking to each other, giving each other support right now that are dealing with things that you're dealing with. For me, that was TikTok. And there's so many people in this last year or two that were like at the end of their rope, thought they were all alone, isolated, didn't have anyone to go to, didn't have the money to go to therapy. It's not just that they feel like stigmatized. It's like a lot of people can't afford it.
Right.
A lot of us got on TikTok. I met so many people on TikTok like this, and I started.
Can you roll his? It's Healing BPD on
Yes,
TikTok, and I mean, you guys can follow him and just listen to, his stories and what he shares. And I know I pulled this off. This was in the intro too, but
Oh, yes.
This was on your page. BPD comes with feeling of deep loneliness, which you've discussed. And that picture, though,
Yes.
it really got me. I was like, oh, that makes me so sad.
That was right when I started the account. It was like we had a lot of snowstorms last winter up here in upstate New York. And I thought, what a great metaphor for the feelings of isolation and loneliness. So here's another thing about borderlines. A lot of times when we feel the threat of rejection or abandonment, perceived or real, we will isolate ourselves in advance and push the other people away. That's another part that you will see a lot of, is when someone who has borderline personality disorder feels threatened emotionally or feels like you may reject them or criticize them or do something that they're not emotionally ready to deal with, they may push you away and isolate themselves in order to avoid getting hurt. Now, I know that sounds illogical, and it is, but it's what our mind tells us is the safest thing. So to go back to your question about what can you do, I highly recommend, like I did, I went online and started finding people that were dealing with their own mental health challenges. TikTok is really strange how the algorithm will show you the people that you are looking for, whether or not you know it or not. That algorithm put so many videos in my feed that spoke to me, and I was just like, what is going on here? Is this real?
Yeah.
And so I found all these really inspirational creators on there. And also, like not just for mental illness, but spirituality, like I was talking about before, spiritual awakening for me, a higher awareness of myself. And like, this isn't an organized religion thing. This is just me feeling a deeper connection to the universe, the cosmos, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. A deeper connection to something larger than myself. And that was the thing after therapy, after dialectical behavioral therapy, that kicked everything up a couple of notches. And that's when all the real deep self-love work came in. Another thing, talk about like, going back to like, how do you heal self-love and how do you do that? Yes, you can go to talk therapy and you can go through these exercises. The exercises that I do are mirror talk. Mirror talk was one that is very uncomfortable at first. And it shows you exactly what your mind, not you, but what your mind's programming is telling you. If you look at yourself and hold your gaze in the mirror and say, I love you, put your hand on your heart, say, I love you. I'm going to take care of you. I'm always going to be here for you. My first reaction was, huh, that doesn't feel right. I don't like that. But I did it because I just kept doing the practice. And sure enough, it got to the point where then the emotional release started coming through. And then it really hit me how important those words really were for myself. And then it was like, all right, I'm here with you.
And
And essentially,
self-love.
I'm looking at my inner child in the reflection. That's who I'm talking to. My inner child, the person that needed all of that reassurance and that love. So anyway, long story short, that's how I built self-love. And that was tied to my spiritual awakening and sort of a higher sense of who I was, which all started with mindfulness exercises. If I'm really being honest, the mindfulness exercises I did in DBT, those were the first baby steps to my larger awakening and awareness. Because it's just about opening up your awareness. That's how it starts with mindfulness. Just pay attention, just observe. And when you start to realize that you're not your thoughts and emotions, and that you actually have the ability to observe them happening and separate yourself from them and take a step back and go, oh, I don't need to just jump in that emotion and just ride it out. Because that's what borderline is. Yeah. It's intense emotions that you can't control. So we're so used to just believing those emotions and those thoughts are who we are. Once you get the separation and the awareness,
I love this.
You start to be able to observe it from afar, and then you get further and further away, and then you start to be able to like, look at that. Yeah, I don't need that. Let's try this one over here. And then that's when you start to develop the ability to manage them. Once you can separate through observance and awareness, then being able to manage them becomes a lot easier.
Okay, so I love this, and that was very powerful because our thoughts don't define us, and we can. No. That's beautifully said. Okay, so you're giving advice for people what they can do to reach out to other people that are also trying to figure it out and trying to get the help and whatever. Don't you feel though that sometimes you have to be really careful with who you connect with? Yes. Because if you're already struggling and someone else is too, and maybe they're not on the same level of trying to get well that you are, I think that, what do you think about that?
I think you meet people where they are, and if they're not ready to meet you where you are, you let them be.
That's true. So that's good information, because you have to remember that you're trying to better yourself and get better. It's not that you don't like that person, but you have to be self-aware enough, right, to realize that person isn't where you are, and you need to connect with people who are going in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Love it. So I did have a question, Terry. I'm gonna had another question about how long. You're 46. So yes. How many years do you feel like you've been pretty good?
So I got diagnosed when I was 39, coming up on 40. And so I've been working with the same behavioral psychologist for the last 7 years, about 7 years. DBT started that first year.
What's that acronym stand for, DBT?
Dialectical behavioral therapy.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, like I said, pretty quickly within the first 3-6 months, I started feeling a change. At the end of that first year, I felt like I had changed so many things about my behavior. Granted, that wasn't like, hey, we're all good. It is still ongoing daily work. It's a lifestyle change. When I started to feel really in a better place was after that first year. But I've had a number of traumatic events over the course of the last 7 years that have sort of made it very challenging for me. And I would say I really, really developed the skills that set in and allowed me to live the life that I live now after about 3 years. It took me about 3 years. But then, like I said, I've had multiple traumatic events over the last 7 years. I lost both my parents. I've been in relationships because I was still choosing relationships,
Hmm.
um,
Out of the same habit that you had
same
before.
habits, and they were in turn traumatizing. Um, but these past 2.5 years, since I've really embraced the spiritual awakening and really embraced all of the things that go along with that. I've I feel so completely and authentically myself now that I'm on an unshakable foundation. That doesn't mean that I don't have bad days. Like right now,
Everyone does.
I'm going through struggles right now, and like I have a 15-year-old cat that I have to. We talked about this. I have a 15-year-old cat that I have to let go, and emotionally, it's the same as when I lost my parents, and it's very challenging because um, it's coming. It's I'm experiencing some really extreme emotions around it, and I'm managing them well, but it's not just like deep sadness. It's been tapping back into like feelings
Old
of
trauma.
guilt,
Hmm.
shame, old trauma starts to peek in. It's not a complete like spiral the way it would have been before therapy, but I'm noticing it. But what I'm doing now is I'm aware of it when it happens in real time. I'm taking steps to manage it and double down on the efforts in real time so that it doesn't become problematic. It sucks that I still have to deal with those extra layers outside
Exactly.
of just having a deep sadness for losing a pet that you love. But I'm able to do this now because of all the hard work that I did. And it's like, I'm in a place now where I have a really full emotional life, full of all of the things that we all experience. And I can experience them in a very healthy way and allow myself to fully experiencing them. Where before, as I was unregulated, having extreme emotions, I used poor, ineffective coping skills. Um, and sometimes, a lot of times, no coping skills
Yes.
whatsoever. So,
Well, you know what I get from this too, that I want everyone to hear is that if you're struggling with any type of mental illness, there's hope. I mean, you have been struggling over the course of your life. And I mean, think all that you had gone through prior to being diagnosed when you were 39,
yeah,
that now this chapter of your life is going to be the most beautiful of your entire life because you have the appropriate help that you need. You have the tools now, the appropriate tools to help you deal with what you have. And wow. So I think this is a beautiful message to our listeners that if you or someone you know are struggling with this, there is help out there, and there's no shame in your game when you get help. In fact, that is the strong thing and brave thing to do.
absolutely. Don't isolate. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't think that you're a burden.
Not at all.
There are people who are going to have your back. And I know in some cases, maybe someone's alone. Like, granted, I was quite alone and have developed this whole new network of friends on TikTok
Yeah.
that I've met. It's really an amazing thing. I've transitioned so much, and I really truly believe in manifesting things in your life. And all the support, the love, the camaraderie, the understanding of me as my authentic self, not masking my disorder for anyone, and having
Mhm.
them say how much they love and appreciate me for everything that I'm doing. That's you know that's what's on the other side of opening yourself up.
Wow, yeah. And you know,
Vulnerability is your greatest
vulnerability
strength.
is your friend. And the fact that you being true to who you are and not hiding it and masking yourself, like you said,
Yes,
um, you trust yourself that I am who I am, and I've accepted myself. Now, if someone else chooses not to, that's on them.
that's okay.
It has nothing to do with you. It has more to do about what they can or can't handle. But
Right.
I think you're lovely. I love what you have to say. I think you're highly intelligent and have so much to offer. And I'm so blessed that you came on the show. And I can't believe it's been an hour. So
I know, right?
it's crazy. But
Wow.
we've had this amazing discussion and I've enjoyed every minute of it. But before we go, if there's anything else that you really feel called to let everyone know, now's the time.
Give yourself grace. Find gratitude in all of it. Acceptance, surrender, and gratitude have been the greatest gifts that I've been able to develop. And it may seem like, how can I be grateful for the hard stuff? Man, you really, when you come through the other side of it, the lessons appear, the real value in them appears. But always give yourself grace, give yourself acceptance, and don't give yourself, like, we're used to beating up on ourselves. And if I can say anything, just leave that to the side. Just give yourself as much grace and acceptance as you can, and try to surrender to what's happening. If we just allow the things to happen, a lot of times we can reduce suffering.
Very good. And from the words of Scott Hump Day Humphrey, love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone. Look, Sean says, thank you. Gratitude does rule by believe in yourself. Sean says, thank you for sharing your story, Scott. You give hope to so many. Believe in yourself says time flying is proof of enjoyment, in my opinion.
Yes,
Gary
absolutely.
says, thank you for your education and sharing your story with us. So, yeah, and everyone listening, share this out. There are so many struggling right now with mental health illness. And I know September is the suicide prevention
awareness
month. And, it goes hand in hand, right? So let's share this out if you choose, if you enjoyed what we talked about and someone else could benefit from it, share it. So with that being said, Scott, thank you. Hang in the back. We'll have mints and champagne. No,
thank you.
And Lynn, let's get the outro. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.